Happy Aloha. Boy, wasn't that beautiful? See, I mean, I'm just sitting there because Shannon and I just moved back. My wife and I just moved back from living in Hawaii for 16 years. So I'm sitting here listening to Athena, who I knew in Hawaii, and listening to a very familiar voice with everyone looking. I mean, the aloha here in church, I can hardly take it. I think I'm back in Hawaii again. I mean, in fact, if you don't mind, I've got to take a picture of this. Nobody's going to believe it. They're going to say, what? You're on the mainland? You're not on the islands anywhere? What in the world is going on? So listen, you've already done the aloha greeting, but I'm going to do this one more time. So on the count of 3, I want you to say out loud, aloha, and I'm going to take a picture, all right? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Aloha. Oh, my. I'm back on the islands again, Athena. I really am. So look, you all have these beautiful leis. Look very, very lovely. You look very lovely. I can see the aloha in your faces, but you need to understand, this lei is actually all the way from Hawaii. You need to understand this, Athena. I don't know how you got it here. You got it here somehow, all the way from Hawaii, the islands. I think Pastor Zach has a lei on as well. My wife was to have one as well, but she needs to be, her parents live in Sunnyvale. Her mother fell and broke her hip, and so family's needing her attention right now. But Athena, thank you so much. This just really, really means so much to me. I want to just make sure I take a moment to express just a heartfelt word of mahalo and appreciation to Pastor Zach for the invitation of being here. So a few months ago, I had the opportunity to just give a very brief presentation about ADRA for all the pastors. They were having a Central California pastors meeting. And at the end, I said, hey, look, I'm an ambassador for ADRA now, and if there's an opportunity to come, if you'd like for me to come and worship in your church sometime, just let me know. I'm telling you, I had barely sat down and I get a text message. It's from Zach. He was the very first one. And we started having some conversation and trying to work out some dates that would work out. And here we are, April 1. On Sabbath. This is very, very special. It was very kind, Pastor Zach, what you said about our interview. And if I said a few positive things and it was assuring and affirming, then I'm passing on what your dad did for me when I was a young pastor. So Pastor Jerry, you don't understand, when Sharon and I finished the seminary, we were assigned to 2 little churches in Wyoming. Any of you been to Wyoming? There you have. You've been to Wyoming. All I can say is that God must have a real sense of humor, because when we were going through those winters of 30 below zero for weeks at a time, only God knew, just hang on, Ralph, you're going to be in Hawaii someday. I mean, who knew? Only God. He must have smiled and said, Ralph, I've got something really special in mind for you. Just hang in there. You're going to be you're just going to be fine. But Pastor Jerry, let me tell you, it was just going through in-gathering, very discouraging, having a difficult time. I called, he could tell by the sound of my voice, because he was in the conference office that time in Denver, Colorado, Lander and Riverton, at least a 6 or 7 hour drive away. And he must have heard my voice, and he said, Ralph, I'm going to come up, and we're going to do in-gathering together. Do you know, bless his heart, he drove all the way up to Lander, Wyoming, spent a couple of days with me, knocking on doors in the community and businesses in-gathering. I've never forgot that. And because of his example, when I became a president, I made sure that I was very intentional with our pastors, particularly the younger ones. So Zach, this is generational. I'm just passing on to you what was passed on to me by your dad. So Jerry and Janet, nice to see you. Well, that's true. That's true. Central did get him. I would have gotten him in Hawaii if I could have. So thank you again. A wonderful, wonderful blessing. I just want to say just very quickly. So Sharon and I, we pastored for 26 years, mostly in Northern California, and then for the last 16 years, we were invited to be the president of the Hawaii Conference. So during the years that we were pastoring, we obviously moved a few times, pastored several different churches. But for 16 years, we hadn't moved. I guess we had forgotten over that period of time just what a pain moving is. That's one of the things I dislike the most was the fact of having to move. And when you move, by the way, if any of you are thinking of moving, don't. Unless you're thinking of moving here, then go ahead and do it. But if you're thinking of moving just to move, don't. It's just But so one of the hard things about moving is this whole thing of, so what do you keep, what do you throw away? And you're just constantly having to make these decisions until somebody came up and shared this with me. It's a brilliant concept. I'd never thought of this before, but they said, listen, all you got to do is, if you're not sure if this is something that you're going to use and you want to keep, or if you're just done with it and just get rid of it and throw it away, if you're not sure, put it in a box, write today's date, and then tape it up. And then a year from now, if you've not used anything in there, throw it away, get rid of it. I mean, it's obvious. You don't need it. Just get rid of it. I was so excited. I came home and told Sharon that. I said, listen, I mean, this is very simple. This is what we can do. I noticed she didn't say a whole lot. And then the next morning when I got up and I looked in the mirror, I noticed that there was a date written on my forehead. I mean, I'm still not exactly sure what to do with that. So it's just, it is one of those interesting concepts. Hey, listen, I invite you to just, if you take your scriptures and open them up to Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13, we're going to get there in just a second. But because this is an ADRA Sabbath, I want to say just a few things about ADRA. This is not going to be a documentary today about ADRA. I have a message I want to share with you. But look, I've always loved ADRA. And I guess part of it, and you can tag me with this, it is true. My dad, for 17 years, was president of ADRA, this worldwide organization. But I'm going to tell you the reason why I love ADRA. Because look, when there's a disaster or crisis in other parts of the world, so let's just go back to Ukraine. So you remember it was about a year ago, Russia invades Ukraine. Well, I can't leave where I am and go to the border of Ukraine, but ADRA is there. Listen, do you know that ADRA, that represents us as the Seventh-day Adventist Church, within hours of that invasion, ADRA was on the border of Ukraine. And as all these refugees are crossing abroad, which is mostly marginalized mothers with children and then grandpas and grandmas, because the young men stay. They're providing, hey, listen, do you need a place to stay? Here's some shelter. Are you cold? Here's a blanket. Do you need some clothes? Here's some clothes. Food, we have food. They even had toys for the kids. Because, I mean, you can imagine for a little child being displaced all of a sudden overnight. We're running for our lives. ADRA is there. There's floods in Pakistan. ADRA is there. Turkey, earthquakes, 50,000 people lose their lives, 100,000 people displaced. I can't be in Turkey. You can't be in Turkey. ADRA is there. ADRA is the humanitarian arm of our church. People ask me once in a while, they're reading the newspaper, or they see something in the headlines. Listen, there's a disaster in this part of the world. Is ADRA doing anything? And it gives me so much satisfaction to be able to say, you know what? ADRA is already there. Before the disaster, ADRA is there. ADRA is in over 130 countries right now. And so this is us. This is the Adventist Development Relief Agency, known all around the world, highly respected by countries and other NGOs. This is us as a church. And I'm excited that ADRA is involved and engaged all around the world. It's absolutely thrilling. So it gives me a chance to go around and talk a little bit about ADRA. They want to just inform our people once again what ADRA is doing, express appreciation, et cetera, et cetera. But this is us. This is the church. But I'm going to share with you one of the things I'm most excited about ADRA, and it is this. When there's a crisis and there's a disaster, let's just talk about Turkey right now. Once it is over and the headlines are no longer being, sent out by the news media, most of the other NGOs leave. These are the non-government organizations. These would be humanitarian organizations. But let me tell you something about ADRA. ADRA doesn't leave. ADRA stays. So when the crisis is over, it's not as if people's lives just go back to normal. There's an entire rebuilding of their lives and their homes, et cetera, et cetera. Because oftentimes they have nothing. Do you realize we stay? ADRA stays in these countries and helps these individuals rebuild their lives. Isn't that exciting? I'm just so grateful. So by the way, have you found Romans 13? Okay, Romans 13. You found it, right? Did I give you enough time? I think so. Romans chapter 13. I'm going to share with you. So look, you've read Romans 13. Who knows? We've probably read it 100 times. But there is something here that I have always missed. So this is kind of confessional. I've read it many times, but there's three words here that I have missed until recently. So I'm going to read you the verse, then I'm going to let you know what these three words are. Okay, verse 11, and do this, knowing the time. So this is Paul writing. You understand this? And do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. Why is it high time to wake out of sleep, Paul? For now your salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore, let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the whole armor of light. Now, this is a passage of scripture. Evangelists use this all the time to sort of set the context of the era that we're living in. Set the context of, listen, we're very at the end of time. Jesus is coming very soon, so let's just be awake. Let's be aware of it. Let's be ready. And that's exactly what Paul is saying. But this is what I've always missed. Now, if you want to come after church and say, well, I didn't miss that, Pastor. I've seen that all along. That's fine. I'd like to hear that from you. First three words of verse 11, Paul writes, and do this. I'd always miss that. And do this. And then he goes on and says, once again, the time is at hand, time is very close, nearer than we first believed. But he starts by saying, and do this. The question is, well, Paul, what are you talking about here? And do what? So you want us to do something in anticipation of the nearness of the second coming of Jesus. What is it that you want us to do? Well, fortunately, he has told us in the previous verses. All we got to do is go back and look at the context. Notice what he says starting in verse 8. Paul once again is writing. He says, owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Verse 9, for the commandments, and then he just rapid fire starts listing some of the 10 commandments. Not all of them, but some of them, just to give us an idea of what he's talking about. Don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. If there is any other commandment, it's all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Verse 10, love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Then he says, now do this. In the context of the nearness of Jesus coming, the Apostle Paul says, now do this. Do what? Love your neighbor as yourself. Now do this. What, Paul? Love your neighbor as yourself, because the nearness of his return is coming. And when Jesus comes, he wants to see a people that are loving their neighbor as themselves. Now do this. So you might be asking the question, well, okay, Pastor Ralph, I get it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now do this. But who is my neighbor, huh? I mean, that's the question right there. It's one thing to say, love your neighbor as yourself, but who is my neighbor? Fortunately, we don't have to go to any other source than Jesus himself to discover who our neighbor is. I mean, you remember the story. This is in Luke chapter 10. You don't need to look it up. I'm going to just share the story here with you very, very quick. But Jesus is approached by this rather snarky young lawyer with this punchy, pointed question. And the lawyer looks into the face of Jesus and says, whoa, teacher, why don't you tell me, who is my neighbor? That's the question. Jesus was asked one day by this lawyer, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? And then Jesus tells, who doesn't know this story? We all know this story. We love it. I want to share it with you again. It's in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. So then Jesus answered and said, because in verse 29, the lawyer simply asked, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus answered and said, follow along the story. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, verse 31, a certain priest, so this would be a member of the clergy, all right? A certain priest came down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Verse 32, and likewise, a Levite. This would be a member of the board of elders. So now Levi, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, we got to push the pause button here for just a moment, because you need to understand that as far as the Jews are concerned, there was no marginalized, hated, despised group of people than the Samaritans. The Jews had a saying, the only good Samaritan is a dead one. That was their saying. So now you kind of get a context now of Jesus says, a Samaritan enters now into the story. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Verse 34, so he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine, and he set on him his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took 2 denarii. That would be the equivalent of 2 full days' work. So we're not talking about just simply some change in a pocket here. 2 days' worth of work, 2 denarii, gave it to the innkeeper and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come back, I will repay you. And then Jesus now peers back into the face of this young lawyer and asks this question in verse 36. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Hey, listen, the answer that the lawyer gives says all that you need to know about Jews and Samaritans. Do you realize he can't even mouth the word Samaritan? He can't. His response is simply this. He looks back at Jesus and said, well, he who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said, go and do likewise. The Apostle Paul comes along and says, now do this. Love your neighbor as yourself. So the question is, who is my neighbor? Jesus has dispelled any question at all, once and for all, who our neighbor is. Our neighbor is anyone who is in need. Anyone who is in need. By the way, the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus is the Good Samaritan. Jesus is the one who stopped when my life was crumpled on the side of the road. He's the one that stopped and took. He's the one that has stopped and taken care of you. Jesus is the Good Samaritan. But the answer is very clear. Who is my neighbor? Anyone who is in need. Anyone who is in need. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, male, female, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, inner city, suburban, Christian, atheist, Jew, first world, third world, the entire world. Who is my neighbor? Anyone who is in need. That's the answer of Jesus. Paul says, well, listen, do this. Love your neighbor as yourself. Especially in this context of the soon coming of Jesus. Love your neighbor. Who's my neighbor? Do you see, is there anybody that's in need around you in your life? That is your neighbor. That's your neighbor. Now, I will say to you, I find it a little interesting from time to time where I'll bump into Adventists who will say, you know what, I am so busy just getting ready myself for the second coming of Christ, being prepared for what's coming. I don't have time to get caught up into the messy mingling of trying to figure out how to meet the needs of my neighbors. I'm going to have to leave that to somebody else. I don't have time for it. And I'm thinking to myself, have you read Romans 13 lately? Do you remember the story of the Good Samaritan? And I've come to the conclusion, I think part of it is because we love thinking about and dreaming about and the eschatology of trying to figure out when Jesus is going to come and the soon impending coming of Jesus. And that's the reason why, let's face it, Matthew 24 is one of our favorites. For us as Adventists, it's embedded in our name. We are Seventh-day, what? Adventists. We are living for this advent of Christ. And so Matthew 24, as an Adventist, who is not going to love Matthew chapter 24? The great signs chapter where Jesus, rapid fire, over and over and over again. So these are the signs. You see these signs. I mean, it's like the red light is flashing. I'm coming soon, I'm coming soon, I'm coming soon. And then we stop at the end of Matthew 24 and forget that in the same breath, Jesus launches into Matthew 25. When was the last time you heard anyone talk about Matthew 25? Oh, Matthew 24 all the time. Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story about the 10 maidens, which is another story about be ready. And then Jesus says this, and this is what we don't reflect on enough. He said, listen, I just gave to you the signs of I'm coming, and you can be ready, but until I come, this is what I want to find you actively doing when I arrive. And this is in Matthew 25. I was hungry. You gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was naked. You gave me some clothes. I was lonely. You visited me. Because when you've done it unto the least of these, my friends, you have done it to me. Yeah, I got to confess to you that, I mean, would you just let those words rest on your heart for just a moment, all right? The words. When you've done it unto the least, you've done it to me. I mean, I'll tell you, even just saying that out loud, it just gives me chicken skin. Do you know what chicken skin is? Well, obviously you're all from Hawaii. You've got a lay on. You must know what chicken skin is. So in Hawaii we say chicken skin. We don't say goosebumps. So it'd be like a way of me saying goosebumps. But in Hawaii you say chicken skin. And the reason why you say chicken skin is because if you've ever been to Hawaii, there's chickens everywhere. You can't go anywhere in the islands, but you're just going to see chickens. And if you want to see the most of them, go to the island of Kauai. Kauai has chickens as far as the eyes can see. In fact, I remember one time, so I flew into Lihue, which is the main town there on Kauai. I needed to get to Kapa'a for a meeting. So as I was driving through town, it's not a very large town, as I was driving through town, I looked over and I saw, I mean, there was just a huge bunch of chickens wandering around the parking lot of Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, nobody has said that we got the smartest chickens in Hawaii. I mean, I'm just going to tell you that. But it was like, wow, they're everywhere. A little too brave as far as I'm concerned, but they're everywhere. But when I say those words out loud, you've done it unto me when you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren. Who are the least of these? They're my neighbors. And do this, love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my neighbor? Anyone that's in need. So when Jesus says in Matthew 25, you do it unto the least of these, you're doing it unto me, he's talking about those that have been marginalized. He's talking about those that are just in desperate need. He's talking about our neighbors. I'm going to share with you just a quick little, address story. This is just a way of illustrating it just very, very quickly. So when I was pastoring a church in Northern California. It was just a beautiful church, hospital church, lots of members. This was in the 90s, and I thought, it might be kind of nice to just take my church members, let's just do a mission trip. So I talked to my dad and said, listen, because he was president of ADRA at the time, where should we go? He said, son, I would recommend go to Nepal. The mission director there, he and his wife, Dawn, the Dahunties, if you want to put the screen on, I did bring in just a few pictures just to show you a little bit about them. So if you want to fire that up, I'll put some of these. Or do I need to push something? Oh, maybe I'm the one that does it. Okay, I see a lot of buttons here. Oh, there it goes. All right. So there's Don and Paul Delhunty. So these two, they were the ADRA directors in Nepal at that time. And what they were wanting to do was to bring a group over because in Nepal, so not too far out of Kathmandu, which is the city, is a little community called Kokonau. There was a rather large leper colony. So what the government had done is said, listen, we're going to just get all of, if they got leprosy, we're just going to marginalize you, put you in this corner of Kokonau, and you're just going to live there, and you're going to be on your own, basically. And it's just going to be survival of the fittest. And the Dahuntis came along, and they said, what we would like to do is we would like to build a school for the children that are in this leper colony. Because they say if the children remain in the leper colony, then it's just going to be perpetuated from one generation to another. Because eventually, if they just stay associated with family and grandparents who have active leprosy, they're going to probably get it. But if we could find a way of educating them, let them go to school, teach them, that would give them an opportunity to get out into society, get away from this leper colony, and maybe be able to live a normal life. So I'm just going to share with you a few pictures. So this is the living conditions of these. These are pictures that I actually took. So you can see with some of these individuals, we're talking about very advanced stages of leprosy. See, I mean, look, in our society, leprosy, you never see this. You haven't seen hands that have been atrophied like this before. Sweet, loving individuals, but it's just simply been put off to the side and just left to somehow make it as best as they could on their own. So we built this school in 1995, 1996. So fast forward 20-some years. So Dad and I are traveling back to Nepal to do some more ADRA projects. And I said, look, Dad, if we're going to go back to Nepal, I want to go to Kokana and see this school, see how it's doing. I mean, because it's been 20-some years since we were there. And so Dad said, yep, that's fine. So to get there, has anyone ever flown Buddha Air before? Okay, I highly recommend maybe skipping that. So ADRA was there. So this is ADRA Nepal. They were there. They met us. That Ralph Watts is not for me. It's for my dad. And so the mission picked us up. And so we went to the school. This is the school. So after we'd done all of our other projects, at the very end, before Dad and I left, we said, we got somebody to take us to the school. And I wanted to say, this is the school that we built. It's still standing. I'm actually kind of proud of that. We built something that was going to last for a while. And then immediately, of course, school was in. I started taking pictures. Look, if you travel anywhere in the world, the best pictures you're ever going to get are the children, right? They just do something to your heart. These are some of the children that were attending the school. Actually, this is just from a few years ago. So polite. I mean, they live in a leper colony, but they're going to this school. And the whole idea, once again, is to educate them, to give them an opportunity to be able to integrate into society. So these girls right here. So I don't know if you saw the previous picture, but the classroom is very traditional. Boys on one side, girls on the other. So I just walked up to these girls and said, hey, are there any cute boys around? Point out the cute boys. I mean, look at the smile on their faces. It doesn't matter where in the world that you go, right? We're all pretty much the same. Where are the cute boys? They just could hardly take it. This is the picture I want to bring you to, because this lady heard, because we showed up unannounced, heard that we were there, and she became aware that one of us had been at that school and had brought a group to build that school for the leper colony. She comes running up to us, just talking very excitedly. So, well, tell us your story. She said, I was a little girl here when you came and built this school. I said, really? Yeah. She said, well, what happened next? She said, I attended this school, and then I was able to go on and get a further education. And she said, I have now come back to teach in the exact same school all these years later. And because of you, and because of ADRA, and because of this school, I don't have leprosy. And now I'm teaching the kids in this leper colony so they don't have to have it either. Oh, man. I mean, that's got to give you chicken skin, right? I mean, to think that this is like 20-some years later, but this is ADRA. This is what ADRA does. I don't have the opportunity to just go full-time to these different countries, but all of us can just do a little bit here, a little bit there, and it can make a world of... Who knows what this lady's future would have been if she had remained incarcerated there in that leper colony her entire life. One more thought I want to share with you. I remember this was about the same time period. It's still in Ukiah. I had this desire as a pastor that I wanted to see if during those years that I was there, and I was there for 10 years altogether, if I could have every president of each leadership level in the church, in the denomination, come to my church. So I had the conference president. That wasn't too difficult. I was able to get the union president. That wasn't too hard. To get the division president, that was a bit more work. but got the division president there. But then I was left with the general conference president. I kept saying, I mean, there's just no way that, and at the time it was Elder Bob Falkenberg. This was in the 90s. I said, there is no way. I mean, he's got the entire world church. He's not going to fly all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, and to get from San Francisco, it was in about another 2.5-hour drive to get up to you. I said, he's not going to come. But, I mean, you do not have if you do not ask, right? So it never hurts. I mean, all they can do is say no. So I sent him an email, and he emailed back. He said, Ralph, he said, my schedule's, he said, is the timing open? I said, look, show me the date. I don't care. Just give me a date that you can come. So he gave a date, and then he came. Here's the thing I wanted to say. He made a statement there that day that I've never forgotten. It's just stuck with me. I don't think it's original with him, but it's original with me because when he said it, it was the first time that I had heard it. And so that's my context, is Elder Falkenberg, him making this statement. So he was sharing things that were going on around the world, et cetera, because he traveled the world by then, our president of our entire denomination. But then he said this. He said, as a local church, what you need to do is think global, but act local. Now, you probably have heard this before, and it's just, once again, I don't think I don't think Elder Falkenberg would say that he thought it up. It's probably something that was out there before. But I'm telling you, it caught me in my tracks, and I've thought about that ever since. And this is the way he explained it. He said, listen, think global. In other words, we are a world church. There are issues, there are challenges, there are disasters and crises all around the world. But you can't solve all of them, and you can't be at all of them. But you can do something. So if your heart is inspired that you want to make a contribution, like to ADRA, because ADRA is doing something, fine, do that. If you want to do a short-term project, mission project, fine, do that. Think globally, be aware of the needs and the challenges around the world, but keep in mind, you need to act local. This is where God has planted you. This is your territory. This is the part of the vineyard that God has strategically placed you. This is where you are loving your neighbor. This is where the least of these are in your community. This is where you're involved and engaged. I've never forgotten that. And so even though I talk about ADRA, every place I've been, we've always tried to find ways, obviously, being locally involved, locally engaged. There's all kinds of different ways that you can do it. But I told Pastor Zach, when I was talking to him on the phone this week, I said, listen, I don't want this just to be all about ADRA. Let me affirm what you're doing as a church, as a congregation, as a people in your community. This is your vineyard here. It's not Nepal. It's not Turkey. It's here. And then Pastor Zach just started rattling off the various things that you're doing. I said, whoa, this is far more than when I talk to most pastors. I want to take a moment and just affirm what you're doing here in this community because you're tangibly making a difference. There are needs wherever you look. You don't have to go very far to discover it. There's some huge needs out there. There are neighbors that need to be loved. There are the least of these that need food and clothes and a visit and love and affirmation. They're there. They're here. They're in this community. So yeah, think globally. Yeah, that's fine. Do that. But act local. My heart was convicted on that when I left Hawaii because there was all kinds of different things we were doing in Hawaii. But when we moved back to Lodi, I think it's Lodi, it's like, so Ralph, what are you going to do? I mean, how are you going to add value? How are you going to make a tangible difference in somebody's life? I mean, you've got neighbors there that are going through very difficult times. So this is what I decided to do. So for years for exercise, I've always loved running. I've always loved running. But at my age now, my knees are talking to me, if you know what I mean. So I said, okay, I got to find something else. So I bought a mountain bike. So now I get up and I ride in the morning. But before I walk out the door, I have a backpack. So usually this is first thing in the morning, before usually even the sun has come up. And I carry with me three things. I have a bottle of water. I have a gift card from McDonald's. Don't judge me yet. Let me finish. a gift card from McDonald's, and I have a glow track. You ever heard of glow tracks? Yeah, so you know glow tracks. I get everyone here with me. I bought a packet of glow tracks that specifically address, I think, something that could be of encouragement to them. It's like, where is God when I'm hurting? Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, just beautiful. So when I'm out riding, this is even in Lodi, I think almost every community in the United States now, those that have been marginalized, those that are living on the streets, those that are having a very difficult time, and when I'm riding my bike and I see someone, it's all in like a little packet, all these three, a bottled water, a McDonald's card, and a glow track. And I walk up to them and I say a few words and I give it to them. So before you jump any conclusions about, well, what about the health message? Why can you get a McDonald's, So I went into McDonald's because I don't spend a lot of time there, and I asked a question. I said, well, for $10, can you get a meal? And the guy pointed up and said, yeah, take your pick. $10, you can order 1, 2, or 3, whatever it is that you want. I said, okay, for $10. So I got a bunch of those cards. So here's the way I look at it. What's the point of giving a card for food if they can't get to it? So in Lodi, there's 4 McDonald's. One at this side of town, one at this side of town, and 2 inside. You can walk to any McDonald's in Lodi. You can walk there, guaranteed. So here's my point. If somebody is sitting in McDonald's, munching on a Big Mac, reading a glow track that softens their hearts, and they give their lives to Jesus, I'm cool with that. God can deal with the whole rest of it later, but I'm fine with that. You know what their biggest need right then is? They need something to eat, many of them. And if it's going to be McDonald's, I'm okay with that. And hopefully while they're sitting there, they're going to do some reading along the way. But the point is this. We can all do something. Am I going to solve all the issues in Lodi? Not whatsoever. But the ones I stop and help along the way, I think they would show some appreciation. It's like, do this. Well, love your neighbor. Well, who's my neighbor? Anybody that's in need. You do it to the least of these, you've done it unto me. Listen, we can't be ADRA. That's the global. But what do you say? Let's be very intentional with the local. Because Jesus is coming soon. I do believe that. Romans chapter 13, Matthew 24, the signs are very clear. Jesus is coming very, very soon. But when he comes, wouldn't it be wonderful if he found us actively engaged, fulfilling what he said in Matthew 25? Do it to them, you're doing it to me, the least of these, because these are your neighbors. So I had a little bit different of a conclusion, but there's 2 people here that are also representing something that they're doing for ADRA, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to close out the service today. And I'm going to invite this gentleman up right now, and he's going to share a little bit about their connection with ADRA. But could I just say publicly once again, thank you for the gracious invitation. It's a huge honor, it's a huge blessing, and God has given you so much here. Let's just make sure that we're finding very tangible ways to pass on that blessing to others. God bless.
Thank you so much. Hello? There we go. Thank you so much for that. For those of you who may have seen us, my wife and I'm Michael. My wife is Angela. I think Michelangelo, you'll remember our names. We're the 2 that rode up this morning on the motorcycles. We have decided after retiring, my wife was a successful real estate developer. I spent 24 years in the Navy. We're retired, and we've decided that we're going to spend our retirement with intention and motivated and informed by the very same verses that our brother here shared this morning. Thank you so much for that message. We have embarked on a 10-year-long round-the-world motorcycle adventure. And there's 2 components to what we're doing. There's the have fun and the do good part. You can imagine what the have fun part is going to be, at least if you've ever ridden a motorcycle. But the do good part is the part that I want to share with you this morning. As we travel from country to country and as we travel from continent to continent, there's 2 primary elements to what we're doing. First, we're going to be visiting orphanages. Our very first project is just outside Ensenada. I've done some work with orphanages before, and both my wife and I have worked with youth groups in the church. And you talk about marginalized, talk about people who can't do anything for themselves. Orphans are so incredibly vulnerable. And I was so excited to hear about the digging of the wells project, the fundraising that the kids have been doing in the young class. That's absolutely fantastic. So we're going to be traveling and visiting orphanages and seeing how we can improve safety and quality of life for the kids. And the second thing that we're doing, and it's so exciting to be here with you this morning, Ralph, is we're going to be supporting ADRA projects as well. We're going to be visiting ADRA projects, learning about exactly what's being done, promoting those ADRA projects through our social media feeds, and seeing if we can help both raise awareness and raise funds for those projects to help improve awareness around the world for what ADRA is doing and increase the support base so those projects can be successful. I won't take up any more time at this point because we need to progress. But if you have any questions about what we're doing, please feel free to grab us afterwards. I've got a card that I'd be happy to give you if you want to learn more about what we're doing. And I'm grateful that we could be here this morning to hear what you had to share with us this morning, Ralph. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate Michael and Angela being here. What an example that is of what we just talked about, spending their retirement, traveling the world to help ADRA. What a beautiful thing. In fact, he contacted me this last week and said, you know what, we could come and speak for church, and we would have totally had him speak for church, but we had already planned to have Ralph sharing on ADRA, but God worked it out so that we could have both today. So we're glad that you're here. Thank you. I appreciate that message. It's an incredible reminder that it's all about giving. It's all about living to serve the least of these around us. Let's just pray that God helps us to sink in deep into our own hearts today. Father, thank you. Thank you, first of all, that you are coming again soon so that we can come to be with you forever and that we can see an end of the suffering. And thank you, too, that you have given us our marching orders. You've given us our instructions to occupy in the meantime the territory that's right near us, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, to give our lives for the least of these, knowing that as we minister to the least of these, we're doing it to Jesus. What an incredible, incredible reality. Lord, help that to sink in deep to our hearts. Help that to give us chicken skin or goosebumps or whatever it needs to realize that when we hand that practical thing to somebody, when we get on somebody's roof to fix their roof, when we go next door to pull weeds, when we come to the community farm, when we go out to feed the homeless, when we're in our community meeting needs, that we're actually touching Jesus now. We're looking forward to then, but thank you that we can experience you in the person of the people that we come in contact with day by day. Lord, help this to sink in deep into our hearts. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.